Good morning. Hello, welcome to our Tuesday morning keynote session. Hi. My name is Brett Davis. I'm the CEO of the Park District Risk Management Agency in Illinois. We're a pool of park districts, so essentially special districts, park districts, forest reserve districts, special recreation associations. So this morning we're going to hear from a panel about some far-reaching claims that are really difficult and emotional, sexual abuse and molestation claims. So those claims in the public sector have substantial financial and other impacts for the AGRiP members and for the underlying pool members themselves. So the goal of our panel conversation this morning is to really help us get a better understanding of how these claims unfold, how we can manage them, what are some of the strategies that we have available. So that's what our goal is. I was having dinner last night and talking about the session this morning, and someone said to me, well, gosh, since you're from a special district, you don't have to worry about these types of sexual abuse and molestation claims because it's really a school issue. And the person sitting next to me said, oh no, I think it's actually worse for the special districts because they don't have some of the same controls in place that the schools have. Well, I'm here to tell you that it is absolutely a concern for all members. It's not just a school issue, and that's one of the points that I really wanted to make sure is clear to all of us. And about 7 months ago, one of our members received a communication from the U.S. Center for Safe Sports telling them that a former ice skating instructor was no longer allowed to participate in U.S. Olympic or U.S. figure skating sanctioned events because there had been 3 credible allegations of abuse against that individual. So our member really cooperated with the Illinois State Police on the investigation. Unfortunately, this was a former employee, so we didn't have to deal with the employment issue right at hand for us. But we still have this ongoing potential claim. It has not actually turned into a claim for our member, but we have 3 individuals that have made credible allegations of this person. So that's an example of how this is actually beyond a school issue. A member actually shared with me, an AGRiP member shared with me at a transit agency that there has been an abuse allegation by, the victims were 3 young individuals, and the driver of the transit vehicle was accused of abusing these individuals. So the question and the thought in all of your mind is, well, we have cameras on the buses, how can something like that happen? Something like that can happen because the individual purposely moves the cameras away and then conducts the alleged abuse. So this is an issue for all of us and something that I guess want to drive home that it's a concern for all of us. Yesterday we had the keynote session and Andreas talked about complexity and tight coupling equals the danger zone. So complexity he described as lots of moving parts and relying on indirect indicators. I think that's something we'll see in our abuse and molestation issues here. He also talked about tight couplings as the system being unforgiving. I think if we take those 2 things together and we put them in the context of sexual abuse and molestation claims, we are in fact in the danger zone. So our panelists this morning are going to help us understand and kind of talk through this. And I'll introduce them first. Deborah Callahan from the Washington Schools Risk Management Pool. And we have Kevin Williams from Genesis. And then next is Scott Rohr from Great American Insurance Group. Then we have Mike Reiner. Now on the screen, you'll see Amy Guilford from SETSAG. Unfortunately, Amy is ill, so Mike Reiner from the Michigan Municipal Risk Management Authority is aptly stepping in to take over. So thank you, Mike. Next, we have Martin Brady from Schools Insurance Authority, and then Craig Bolas from Aon Risk Solutions. So welcome to the panelists. Thank you all for being here, and we're really looking forward to sharing some great insight. So our agenda for this morning is really straightforward. These are the 4 things that we want to cover. Kind of the current state. What is the current state of sexual abuse and molestation claims? And we have been calling these SAM claims for short. I apologize to anyone with the name of Sam, but this is going to be the name going forward, our SAM claims. Second, we want to talk about data that's already been collected and really the importance of additional data that we need to be able to fully understand these claims. Third, we're going to share examples of how the SAM claims are effectively managed and mitigated. And then last but not least, similar to what we did yesterday with the keynote session, we're going to have some small group discussion at your tables. So we've got about 60 to 70 minutes of panel conversation and then about 20 minutes of discussion at the tables. So that's the agenda. That's where we're going this morning. I'm going to turn it over to Deborah, who is going to start with her current state story at the Washington schools.
Good morning. Today it's starting with a story about Washington Schools Risk Management Pool. In front of you is a slide that shows our policy or claim counts from 2000 to 2018. And while it's easy to look at this today and see the obvious trajectory up, while you're in the sea change, sometimes it's not quite so obvious. So between 2000 and roughly 2011, we had what we considered normal claim counts. Got a little high, sort of up to 50 or so during that time period, but as you can see, 2009 and 2010, or 2010 and 11, we just had 9 claims each those years. So we thought we were on top of our program. Then, as you can see, almost over an 800% increase the next year. And so then we said, oh my goodness, you know, are we suddenly going into a trend? But then the next year it dropped down into the normal range. Well, nah, it's a blip. So a new word, blip, right, from the actuary. Then we went up a little, then we went down a little, and then up again quite a bit. And so in retrospect, of course, we were in the middle of a sea change as far as the number of claims coming in. And this is an interesting slide because we had, in the first sort of section, we had 191 claims. And in the second section, 293 claims, and that's a 53% increase. But the other story was, it wasn't just the number of claims that were coming in, it was that while we were in the midst of this sea change, the costs of the claims were going up. And so, as you can see, that first 4-year period, 2.2 million, and the second 4-year period, wow. So, a significant increase, and the question is, you know, are you ahead of that or are you behind that in your reserving? And then one more slide that's a good statistic. The green represents staff to student claims, and the blue represents student to student claims, where before we had very low numbers of student to student activity. During this 5-year period, our student on student claims eclipsed staff to student significantly. So that's kind of a brief glimpse into what WSR&P experienced over, I'm going to say, over the last 4 or 5 years. It really was hammering us. So,
thanks. Deborah. And we'll move on to Martin.
Sure. Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Martin Brady. I'm the Executive Director for Schools Insurance Authority in Sacramento, California. We are the oldest pool in California. It started in 1974, and we've got multiple programs for multiple districts, like many of you. And I wanted to share with you just some broad overview of what's happening with some very technical slides here. Right, here's one. You have a pretty good case, Mr. Perkin. How much justice can you afford? And I have to tell you that there's almost a secondary injury based on the manipulation that's going on legislatively and through the legal process by many of the trial attorneys, plaintiffs' attorneys in California. But it's not exclusively California. They're perfecting, they're fine-tuning some of the legislation in order to maximize their ability to punish school districts. And they're not just doing that in California, they're obviously exporting these tricks to other states. So it is something that we're not especially proud of, and we need to organize ourselves in order to shut down some of these manipulation tactics that are going on. In California currently, if there's an award or a mediation and a settlement or a judgment, the trial attorneys are getting 40% of these dollars, and that's 40. And so it's extraordinary in terms of the impact that it's having on our fiscal landscape. The general fund of the school districts are in peril on the natural. And this is something that needs to be addressed, and we need to publicize this fleecing that's going on. And so we've made a commitment to organize ourselves, and I think that fundamentally is one of the biggest obstacles thus far. We've been functioning as individual fingers, and we need to be able to unite to form that fist and better defend our schools. This next slide here, obviously we don't have a product to mark up, right? I mean, we don't have a widget, and so we have to make sure that we function within the dollar amounts that are sent to us annually by the state. And it's imperative for us to be able to focus on what we can control to keep those dollars in the classroom. By the time the first school bell rings, our school district budgets have been spent. It's up to 90% of the budget is gone in salaries and benefits. So any additional erosion into that general fund has a profound effect on our ability to deliver education to the next generation. So it's critical for us to make sure that we unite and stop some of this fleecing. So that's what we're focusing on now, and we're really encouraged with the organization within California in terms of the people, the other pools that are stepping up, and Craig will talk later about what we've been able to do about collaborating and bringing our data together. This last slide that I have, I think we're all familiar with the adage, if you don't know where you're going, any road's going to get you there. And so this is something that we take very seriously. I would like to give a little shout out to Governor Brown. Last Sunday, he did veto a bill, AB 3120, which would have significantly extended the amount of years looking backwards that we were going to be exposed for. And so he did veto that in his wisdom. We're sorry to lose him at the end of January, but I think these bills are going to resurface and come back to us, and we need to be prepared to do battle with many of these attempts to further pull more money out of the school districts. We need to be better than what we've proven ourselves to be thus far, and I think there are some strategies and some methodologies that are very positive in terms of fresh thoughts, fresh ideas, and a lot of it comes from organizing the data to make sure that we know exactly what we can do to best counteract these attempts to erode the public tax dollar. So it's an exciting time because a lot of those pools in California, and I have to say beyond California, many of you in the room have reached out to us with your best thoughts and ideas and the willingness to share data. And so it's amazing the community of pooling where we're going to bind together and try to help come up with better solutions for all of us moving forward. So,
Thanks, Martin. So the governor in California helped out from a legislative standpoint, but that's not necessarily the case in all districts. And Mike now is going to share with us how the Michigan legislature kind of unfolded.
Great. I'm going to run over to the podium here because I'm pinch hitting for Amy, and I have her copious notes here that I'll speak. Your slide shows what something I think most of you in the room have read about in the newspaper, heard on television, in my home state of Michigan, Michigan State University. Dr. Larry Nassar, sports doctor, sexually abused 332 victims under the guise of medical treatment. One of the most horrific cases of sexual assault, I think, in the nation. MSU went through a negotiation process. It shook the university to the core and ended up in a $500 million settlement. Some say that's a lot of money, but when we look at 332 victims, weigh that in relationship to Penn State, it's a lot of money, but hopefully MSU can, from a dollar standpoint, put that behind them. But there are cultural issues and mistakes that were made, And so there's a whole process of additional looking at how we deal with allegations of sexual assault, the reporting of it, and in the case of MSU, as you may have known, there was a significant amount of reporting that was either ignored or was not handled in the appropriate fashion. So what happens? The politicians immediately jump in. While the MSU is going through the negotiation process, our legislature, 156 women, victim statements being read, a lot of media attention, bills are being introduced in the legislature, a lot of notoriety. Unfortunately, this was all happening at the same time that MSU was looking to settle these claims. Former Governor John Engler was appointed as the interim president of MSU, and he and his team crafted that settlement. At the same time, bits and pieces of how victims are treated and what their rights are as victims were being debated by the legislature. And as you can see from the timeline, the legislature ultimately did take action, and Governor Snyder signed that legislation. And our organizations were involved in providing input. The impact of that was to basically provide for retroactive claims. Our statute of limitations was extended, and our governmental immunity was eroded relative to sexual assault. It's very difficult, and when we look at the head of steam that the legislature had in looking at this, there are unintended consequences, making it a criminal act of failure to report an incident. I know that a lot of our communities have after-school programs, and for a young coach to be exposed to a criminal penalty for not reporting has a chilling effect on those types of programs. So at that fast pace, our job was to try to look at some of those unintended consequences, but very difficult in that it's hard to stand up and testify in opposition to this when first and foremost everybody is looking to help the victims, and we support that as well. Retroactive claims and extending statute of limitations, bad facts make bad policy. It's very difficult to do investigations when information is that old. Again, I pointed out the resistance to speak out and point those unintended consequences, and a general public distrust of the system. And I think that even goes beyond Michigan and beyond MSU, in that no matter what happens, once events like this happen, there's a general distrust of the institutions of government, and that justice is not going to be delivered. We see it in sexual assault. My pool, we deal with law enforcement heavily, incarcerations, police shooting, police violence. Again, that whole issue of public trust and the reputation of those institutions has been shaken, and that gradual weakening of public trust, not only in sexual assault, but I think in government services in general, is a trend, and it is indeed an unfortunate trend that we are seeing. So I think that basically tells the story about what we're seeing relative to the threats and challenges in the state of Michigan. The MSU example, I think, is illustrative of the many areas that we see in terms of the threats and also our ability as a pool to underwrite and insure these risks. And I think that's a segue into the next section of the program here this morning, and that when we look at retroactive reporting, definitions of occurrence, investigations. How does that affect? I mean, we go ahead and we underwrite our product based on what we know at the time, occurrence-based coverage, when events that happened many years ago are now active again. Obviously, that creates some concern relative to how we report, how we reserve, our actuarial analysis, our coverage forms, and all of those issues really start to come into play. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin, because that's really his wheelhouse, and he'll take it from there.
Appreciate that. Thanks,
Yeah.
Mike.
Thanks, Mike. Scoot by you here.
So as Mike indicated, when we see bell ringer headlines like Michigan State and $500 million, invariably markets, clients, everyone goes back and tries to analyze what happened on this claim. Was the outcome something that we expected, or did we at least have the tools in place to deal with this? One of those tools is policy language, MOC language, and regular ISO policy language. Now, I'm painfully aware that when you start talking about policy language, there's probably no better way to kill the buzz in a room and to send people into a semi-comatose state. So what I'm going to try to do here is just touch some high-level highlights of sort of the evolution of policy language over the past 32 years, and we'll do that in 3 minutes. Sound okay? All right. For those of you who've been around the shop, so to speak, for a number of years, you'll recognize this language coming right out of ISO. This comes from the 1986 policy. This was one of the first years that the industry started to consolidate multiple policies into single policy language, and it arrived at something like this. But it's an exclusion for the often referred to as the expected or intended exclusion. Now, fortunately, courts were not wont to impute the liability of a perpetrator to the entity itself. Nevertheless, what they were willing to do is embrace expected to and intended to mean if you could reasonably foresee the harm, then that qualifies as expected and intended. So this became problematic as the issue of sexual abuse and molestation claims started to raise up a little bit. Further on in the exclusion 2, we'll see that the employees were only covered for acts within the scope of employment by you. Now, you can tell on the face of it why this is such a problematic policy language construct, because it's going to be very difficult to argue that the activities taken by an alleged perpetrator were in any way within the scope, acts and scope of the employment by the school district, the park district, the special district, or whomever. And finally, the old definition constituted occurrence as meaning an accident, that is something fortuitous, and once again became problematic as the issue of sexual abuse claims started to raise up, because the concept of fortuitous events associated with that type of activity those were hard to reconcile. So the ISO, the standard policy language that some of you have undoubtedly seen over the years, and in fact that some of you may have in place right now, is, and remains problematic for public entities, school districts, and special districts, because it is very limited in the type of coverage that it will provide for abuse-related claims. Now, as the claim started to bubble up some years back, some of you might have seen something like this. I won't read the whole thing to you, but this was actually a drop dead, as we call it, abuse and molestation exclusion. And essentially what it says is not only is the perpetrator, coverage for the alleged perpetrator excluded for coverage, but so is the vicarious liability associated with the school district, the park district, the special district. That became really problematic in the public entity space. Today, we're seeing much more favorable language, supporting much more favorable language on what is either called a per perpetrator basis or a per victim basis in terms of providing that affirmative coverage for sexual abuse and molestation. And I want to make a point here, because a lot of times we talk with clients, and rightfully so, they would like to construct language that is broad as possible for the benefit of their members, and that's certainly understandable. And they would like it to be as flexible as possible so that they have the ability to adjudicate or handle a claim and not be constrained by policy language, and that's understandable as well. What I always hasten to point out to folks, though, is there's a third constituency that we don't think about sometimes, and that is we're also writing the policy language to keep the plaintiff's bar at arm's length so that they don't get to determine how your coverage is going to apply to your member and the claim against your member. But today, with respect to sexual abuse and molestation, we're seeing a lot more construct like this. Non-employment harassment is a term you sometimes see. It's just a synonym for the abuse and molestation cover that we're talking about this morning. We encourage people to be definitive in their policy language construct and make sure that when they're providing the coverage that it does exactly what they want it to do. And the way to do that, by way of example, is to make sure that the trigger for the coverage is the first illicit contact or the first illicit touch. What that does is it actually restricts the coverage to a single policy term, a single set of limits, and not coincidentally, a single retention for the pool or the member. I mentioned per perpetrator or per victim trigger coverages. I think Scott will affirm that the marketplace is currently supporting both of those, in fact, so that we see a lot of per perpetrator, so that if we have a single perpetrator with multiple victims, our clients don't find themselves generally in a position of having to assume multiple SIRs or multiple retentions. Single occurrence language, again, that's just kind of restricting it to a single policy term. If that language isn't clear within the policy construct language, this is a popular place for plaintiff's bar to go seeking additional coverage and stacking of limits. And also, when we're talking about the number of victims on a per perpetrator coverage in particular, we're looking to have that written rather so that regardless of the number of victims over the number of years, the number of locations, all of those things, it's again boxed in for the benefit of the pool to a single set of limits and more importantly, I think, a single retention. I just thought I would point this up to throw this up to sort of show where some clients are going right now. This is a pool client of ours that decided to put in some restrictions regarding sexual abuse and molestation cover. And what they did is they said, look, we understand that in virtually every jurisdiction there's a mandated reporter statute on the books. And we want to make sure that our members and the mandated reporters that are qualified by law are feeling the weight of responsibility to actually take that responsibility and act upon it. So I won't read the whole thing to you. You can look at it yourself here, but basically what they've said is that if you're a mandated reporter and you knowingly don't act according to what's required of you by statute, the coverage is not going to respond. It's a bold move. It's not one that we see a lot of, and sometimes these conversations are difficult to have, but in today's changing environment, I think this is something that is well worth considering as you look ahead and try to, if you will, put a box around and cap some of the runaway activity that we're seeing in sexual abuse and molestation. Now that's just a little bit about policy language, and that's only one wall, one block, if you will, to dealing with this emerging and frankly frightening issue in terms of dollars and social impact. But it's not the only thing. And our good friends in the plaintiff's bar have a lot of activity going on, and they're doing a pretty good job now at bringing this to the forefront and making life difficult. And I think Scott's got some things to say about that very topic.
Thanks, Kevin. Well, good morning. I was at dinner with Martin last night, and Martin said coming to AGRiP is like coming to a homecoming or a family reunion. And I really believe that. I've devoted my career last 28 years to public entity and pools, and this issue is one of the toughest issues that I have dealt with and that we as a community have to deal with. And so our mission statement at Great American in our public sector division has a phrase in there that when we are at our best, we protect and save public funds, and we protect and save lives. And really, this issue is about getting back on track and doing that. And so we are at a tipping point where it's not a blip. It really is much more than a blip and appears to be a new trend going forward, as Deborah's slide showed so vividly. We are watching with dismay the increasing values, the frequency and severity increasing, and most importantly, these specialized plaintiff firms who spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, trying to figure out how they can get that award or settlement from $7 million to $25 million to $30 million, or from $100,000 a kid to $500,000 a kid to $3 million a kid. And that's happening, and as Martin says, they're sucking out the dollars right from our school system, and they're not part of the solution at all. So what I do want to say is one of Deborah's slides showed the student on student as well as the teacher on student. And what I would say, and this goes with Kevin's slide on reporting, there is a significant difference when there's prior knowledge by the school district. And if we have any kind of control at all, we have some control to address when there's prior knowledge by another teacher, another student, administrator, to try to get these claims reported. The values of these settlements are exponentially different when the school has prior knowledge and fails to act in an expedient way. So Kevin was mentioning some of the things that you're starting to see in the reinsurer market and underwriters, and how are we going to address this? What are we going to do? So, some of the things are very straightforward. I always like to say I love to work with pools because we have an alignment of risk. We are all sharing in the same kind of goals of risk prevention. You're taking risks through SIRs. We're putting out limits, and the claims behavior is all aligned, and that's what we like. But sometimes increasing retentions or decreasing capacity might not be enough. So we have to add more than just that and figure out on a pool-by-pool basis how to do it. One of the things that we talked about as a panel when we first started was it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I can't tell you how many school districts and how many pools I talk to that say this doesn't happen here. So one of the key things we're trying to do today is just bring awareness. It's not, if you haven't had an abuse claim yet, whether you're a school pool or a muni pool or a transit pool or a park district, I don't think it's because you're doing something different than everybody else. I think it just hasn't come to light yet. If you can tell me otherwise, I think we all want to know. One of the big projects we're doing now in our company, all my employees are involved in this project, is we're going back 2, 3, 4 years, and we're looking at the reserves that the pools have set on claims, these SAM claims, as well as our reserves, and we're saying in the new world, in this new marketplace, in this transition, are these reserves adequate? Because if we don't have the right numbers, then everything else is off. We can get the retentions wrong, the pricing will be wrong, everything will be wrong. So we have to find out, our first base point is, are the reserves right in this new environment? Clearly, though, the current state, the status quo is unsustainable, and we're looking for ways to address it, and we're doing that on a pool-by-pool basis. We're trying not to make across-the-board decisions. I had a couple other points I just want to make. We're talking about the West Coast, Washington, and California a lot, but the data shows that the increases in the other parts of the country are also happening. Frequency is increasing, and the values are increasing, just not as severely as we're seeing in the West Coast, but it's a trend that's happening across the country. The other thing is, Great American, we do not write higher education, but I can tell you the ripple effects of the Michigan State loss and the Penn State loss is affecting, public schools, K through 12, dramatically. We have had a couple settlements where after the fact we've heard where the mediator has referred to Jerry Sandusky in Penn State when the facts of the case were totally just different than what happened at Penn State. But that was in the mediator's mind. The same thing with the Michigan State Award. It's really the ripple effect that is causing, you know, a dramatic awareness in our culture to submit these claims. With this, I believe I'm going to turn it over to Craig.
So the panel has done a great job of kind of outlining where we're at with the current state. Now, Greg is going to kick us off with the data collection process,
Sure.
where we're at.
How many of you have heard the famous Chinese curse? May you live in interesting times. So that's what we've got in California. Martin and I were talking at a conference a year and a half ago, and Martin said, you know, we're getting creamed. We're losing so much money on sexual abuse and molestation. We have to get our arms around it, and we have to find a way to get to the legislature and find some kind of relief. So we agreed that, you know, with Martin's blessing, we would initiate a study that contemplated collecting as much data as we could obtain on large losses in California. So we had a sense that molestation was driving the costs, but we wanted to validate that. So we initially started with 6 or 7 large pools, and I think one of the most important takeaways from the exercise was that, you know, these pools compete for business, and they were all in terms of providing data, getting together, talking about solutions. So, you know, nobody was hiding anything under the pillow. It was a good effort. And once several core members heard about this, then we went out and we recruited another 6 or 7 pools. So we have 12 pools in one large school district in the study. We formed a steering committee to, okay, what's our goal here? What do we want out of the study? What's the deliverable? What are we trying to achieve? And with that in mind, we were able to collect over 14,000 claims. So the 14,000 claims represent about 60% of California's average daily attendance over a 10-year period. So now we have 14,000 claims. What do we do with them? The first thing we did was we looked at losses of over $1 million. And within that 14,000 claim sample, there were 113 losses in excess of $1 million. So what we discovered is that 0.8% of the claims in the database drive 50% of the total incurred value. 40% of those, 40%, are sexual abuse and molestation. And that percentage is on the rise. So 37 occurrences involving 96 individual claimants. One of the things that we also found was that, you know, as people have indicated, there are certain law firms who specialize in sexual abuse and molestation in California. One firm is Taylor & Ring, and the other is Manley Stewart. So you've seen several examples of verdicts in the prior slides. Manley Stewart is the firm that hit Michigan State. Manley Stewart is the firm that hit Torrance. So Torrance, you got 22 wrestlers who were examined by an aide coach for a ringworm, and it turns out that this guy's, you know, he's a pervert and he's got a history. So, you know, you're generally looking at, you know, on these large claims, the average value is $1.25 million. So the study is just a $1 million plus study. It is not a study of all claims, but, you know, we're going to get to that. But the bottom line is that Manley Stewart and Taylor & Ring are very, very good at litigating sexual abuse and molestation claims. They advertise. If you have a couple minutes and you want to see what we're talking about, just Google M-A-N-L-Y, Manley Stewart, and you will see their website wherein they brag about the fact that they have paid other law firms $25 million over the past 4 years to bring them cases. That is not just in California. They will export that beyond Michigan, into Oklahoma, into Texas, so it's coming. The steering committee, you know, okay, so we're looking at the data and what do we want to get out of it? The first thing that we see in these large losses is that we have too many defense attorneys handling them. we have defense attorneys who don't know how to litigate a sexual abuse and molestation claim, and they're getting smoked. So one of the potential deliverables is let's identify a panel of very good defense attorneys who can go to war with the Manley Stewarts and the Taylor and Rings of the world. So we have 14,000 claims. What's the next phase of the study? The participants have agreed that we do need to take a deeper dive into the data. Let's look at ground-up molestation. Let's look at near misses. I have said many times when I do presentations that you guys all have Ferrari risk management information systems, and you're treating them like Volkswagens. What you need to begin doing is you need to begin looking at the root cause of the loss, not just the fact that it's a molestation. We need to figure out, okay, what happened? Why did it go sideways? And that's typically not something that you code in a REMIS system. So we need to be looking, okay, did we follow procedure? Did we do the proper background check? What is a proper background check? Really start pulling information out of this data that, the medical industry calls it medical errors. Well, they're near misses. If we have 113 losses, including 38 molestations that are over $1 million, we probably have 250 that are less but could have been. So that's the deliverable of the program, and then we will talk to Martin and the participants in the study, and we will try and find out what we can do with this legislatively. Just to reiterate the fact that this is not just a California problem. A 5/117 article in the AP Boston Globe said that they believe there were 17,000 molestation cases, abuse cases, or incidents at least, over a 4-year period, which is roughly 4,200 a year. Our data does not include LAUSD. And LAUSD recently came out, and one of the board of directors said, yeah, we've paid $300 million in the past few years. So that, that eclipses the number that we have in our study. So it's a big problem. It's getting worse, and we have to try and find a way to deal with it.
All right. Thank you. Kevin, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of affirm Craig's comments from an excess of loss reinsurer's perspective. Took a look at some of our numbers, which thankfully are not 14,000 in number, but still significant to us. And one of the things I wanted to see is how does it compare with some of the statistics that Craig was genning up here with respect to number of sex mal claims reported as a percentage of all claims reported, and what those values kind of look like. So I took a look back to about the year 2005 within Genesis, and about 8% of all claims reported to us were sex mal. Now, understand we're an excess of loss reinsurer, so slips and falls and trips, we don't get those. We just get the ones that have capacity or potential for large dollar amounts. But about 8% of the claims were sex mal related. We have about just under 500 SAM coded claims registered in our system since the year 2005. Surprisingly, only about 54, 55 of those have dollar amounts associated with them currently. However, the dollar amounts are wide ranging. We're down probably at a low of just under $100,000 to our largest single case, which is about $10 million and climbing on a single perpetrator. So the range there is dramatic. I would also point out that about half of all of the claims that we do have that have dollars associated with them, and half of that same claim count do come out of the great state of California. It's just the way things have turned out, and I can say without too much reservation that that does not correspond at all to the amount of business we wrote in California, either in policy count or premium dollars. So there's a disproportionate dollar amount and claim count that is currently coming out of the state of California. But as Craig pointed out, and as others have said, this is not just a California issue. It will never remain just a California issue, and we're beginning to see that creep in. We have a long history in this industry of watching trends creep in from the coasts and take hold in the middle of the country. So we are fully anticipating to see those trends continue and to ramp up again in the middle of the country as we see things like the Michigan State headline, hashtag #MeToo movement take hold and really begin to drive the dialogue around this egregious event.
Thank you, Kevin. So Apparently us Midwesterners have something else to look forward to. So we're going to transition now, thanks Greg and Kevin, to Deborah, who is going to talk us through some of the proactive claims management and mitigation techniques that they've implemented in Washington State.
Thank you. So this slide, risk barometer, and I want to do a little shout out to United Educators, whom I borrowed this concept from with their permission. So when I thought about those increasing reserves that were coming up, you start to have to look at all of these different risks. So the claim count's coming up, but are your reserves properly set? Are you accounting for the fact that they have new volume? And so your reserve risk is, by not identifying that cost trend soon enough, you can insufficiently reserve those SAM claims and get behind the curve, which then rolls you into your equity risk. Those SAM reserves and payments were the #1 contributor to WSRMP's reduction in equity. I just rolled right into contribution risk. If you're behind in your reserves, you're not adequately determining what you're supposed to be funding for, and so your contributions aren't necessarily keeping pace with the reserves that you need to have. So we had to catch up with a 40% increase in reserves this past year. So if you don't do that, you run the risk of regulatory risk. Are you going to be sinking below thresholds within your state? We did not do that. Reinsurance risk. Suddenly we're sending in scads of claims to our reinsurers, and they're like, Deborah, what's going on out there? We think we need to come in and do an audit. That's always fun. But one of the most important things you want to remember is you never want to be undesirable to a reinsurer. So transparency is one of the most important things to talk about and talking to them about how you're getting on top of these cases. We did not have any issues with our reinsurers. And then you have to think about member retention risk. You do a big bump in order to catch up with those reserves and claim payments, and suddenly your members are turning in notices to withdraw. So luckily we could have had an onslaught of withdrawals. We did not. We had 3, and 1 was recently rescinded, so out of our entire pool, we have 2. I count that stickiness with our members to how well we communicated the situation that was going on and how well we communicated the list of things that we intended to do in order to counteract what we were seeing. And then, of course, reputation risk. Once everyone gets talking about it, suddenly there's this pall. And so at this point, the pool remains intact, but if you think about this slippery slope and how that might affect your pool, this can just get out of control. So in my opinion, there's been a seismic social shift in demanding social responsibility for sex abuse in our country. Number of cases will continue to go up, and the dollar values will continue to go up. So with that, at WSRMP, we thought, okay, what are we going to do? So do we just want to do one thing? You want to limit coverage? You want to put in some deductibles? We decided one thing is not good enough. We had to do a number of things because if one thing didn't work, we're still in the same boat. So we did a change to our claims approach. In fact, we actually have an external and internal claims strategy that we shifted, quite unique. We enhanced our risk prevention strategy and our loss control efforts, instituted stronger data-driven approach with our origami system, and we directly connected that to underwriting. We started a sex abuse prevention advisory program called SAPAC Committee and had everybody on board, our sex abuse attorneys and staff and districts. So I'll tell you a little bit more about that, and initiated a statewide collaboration that includes our competitor, as a matter of fact, and our ability to have a voice to our state legislators. So let's talk a little bit about the internal claims approach. First of all, we start off with intense claims training. We got our sex abuse attorneys and no other attorneys in the room and our staff, and we started to look at adjuster bias, for example. We had adjusters who empathized with plaintiffs and were setting very high reserves. We had adjusters who did not sympathize with plaintiffs at all and were setting low reserves. We talked about tiering our claims, a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. You know, tier 1 being something like an accidental brush or a sexting, haven't necessarily heard from the family or the claimant. And then, of course, you all know what a tier 3 looks like. And then there's that sort of gray middle ground in between with what exactly does tier 2 mean. And just sort of developed a strategic approach to reserving each of these. We asked a independent claims auditor to come out immediately and give us an audit and tell us what we needed to know. And the interesting thing is because we had responded, we were now reserving tier 2 and tier 3 claims correctly. But our auditor said, you're over-reserving your tier 1s. So we were able to, using an actuary, develop a statistical reserve for tier 1 claims. What we basically were looking at is these cases are going to go away for 0 in 6 months. So we're going to set a statistical reserve, and we watch. And at the end, we call the school district. Is the child still in school? Attendance okay? Grades are up? No visits to the counselor? Haven't heard from mommy? Close the claim. This has been a significant impact to how we were adjusting claims. From an external claim standpoint, of course, we identified a sex abuse panel. And we only went with like the winners, the top ones who really get it. One of the attorneys was handling a lot of our church abuse cases in the Seattle Archdiocese. We put together a compassionate care team. It's a model where we have the school district, not claims, not investigators, but the school district immediately meet with the victim and the families to offer counseling and a safety plan with the attempt to show compassion, not question whether it's true or not be built upon whether or not the investigation is going to prove it out or not, but basically deliver compassion to the family as though it were true, and connect the educators with the families. We are considering a new coverage up front in order to help pay for that therapy. And I'm not interested in just paying for the potential victim in student-on-student cases. What about also paying for therapy for the child who's alleged to be the offending student? Both kids need help. You're going to have these kids for 15 years in your classrooms. Let's not, wait for the child to come back and offend again in junior high and offend again in high school. We do an early assessment and offer money, and I can tell you that we've been very successful in getting some of the cases that we imagine would end up to be millions of dollars settled for very reasonable amounts. But if the family is represented, then we use pre-litigation protocols with plaintiff's counsel. We set up mini depositions, early exchange of documents, go to an early mediation, and again, I can tell you we are getting settlements way below what the case would be, and our legal expense is next to nothing. So we have to also talk about risk prevention, right? So that's claims. Here's another tactic, risk prevention. So we created a member-specific action plan. 53 of our 93 school districts, including us, have sex abuse claims open. So while the plan looked at which was the specific driver for each district, and some, it's transportation and employment liability, most of them, they had a sex abuse case open. So we created a sex abuse plan. And it wasn't just, hi, let's make sure that your policies are up to date and that you're following them and you're doing background checks and all the usuals. Here's some training. It's also taking the look to see your classes your claims are happening on the bus. So we're going to look at supervision of transportation claims of sexual touching that's happening on the bus. Or your claims are happening in the special education classroom. So let's take a look at providing specific training to paraeducators on this type of claim that's happening. We have 3 districts that are very high volume contributors to our claim count, and we have 11 additional that are pretty high volume. So if you look at these 14, so the 3, I'm going to say is about 45% of our claim volume. 14 is over 80% of our claim volume, so how do we provide special treatment and special handling to these 14 districts, and what kind of benefit can we gain of really focusing on them? We've developed, or in the process of developing, some e-learning modules on red flags. Right now we've got it for staff. We're looking at doing it for students and parents. Of course, we've done the usual onslaught of trainings and resources and things. We've purchased a book on threat assessment because while most of you might think of a threat assessment as the Columbine sort of situation where you determine a level 1 or level 2 student who's more likely to be an active shooter, there's also a section of threat assessment that deals with sexual abuse. And so we're also looking at helping our districts understand that through our educational service districts and training them on considering sex abuse level 1 and level 2. We've hired a child psychologist. This person has been invaluable for us. Not only are they teaching us the difference between the plaintiff attorneys calling our kids pedophiles and normal sexual growth and behavior for some children, as well as abnormal when you're dealing with special education kids. We've hired him as an expert, and he is doing a great job on our cases in really thwarting that sort of plaintiff attack on these bad kids. And finally, we're offering anonymous reporting tools to those high claim volume members on a pilot basis. So Scott, I know you have experience in some of those anonymous reporting tools, and thought, why don't you tell us about that?
Be glad to. Thanks, Deborah. One thing's for certain, there's not one specific answer for prevention of these claims. There are many things. Before I get into the anonymous reporting, I would say I commend Deborah and her team on creatively thinking about more efforts on early intervention. That's something that we see lacking on almost all these claims. Early intervention is a key. Another item Craig mentioned is specialized defense attorneys. Don't slough this off to the guy who does your auto claims or whatever. You got to identify before the fact specialized defense firms, and reinsurers may be able to help you with that if you don't have somebody that has that kind of experience. The other thing Deborah mentioned that I want to point out is repeat offenders. Something is significantly wrong if a school district goes through this kind of emotional, crazy, horrendous claims scenario and doesn't learn something from that. There's got to be a learning experience that you would think that would lead to a significant drop or an elimination of future claims. And when you are seeing repeat school districts having the same administration with the same types of losses, there's got to be some dramatic action in all kinds of ways, from pricing and retentions to deductibles to all these the other programs that Deborah was mentioning. One of the things that is a common theme almost 100% of the time we see is somebody else knows, besides the perpetrator and the victim, somebody else knows, another teacher, a trusted friend, somebody knows. So a couple years ago, 2.5 years ago, we started looking into anonymous reporting and the impact on that. And frankly, it started through bullying, and we're trying to help the industry, our community, address the bullying problem. And we found the Stop It anonymous reporting app. I'm holding a book here that is Free Us from Bullying by Paul Coughlin, who has become a friend of mine. I brought it up here with me because there's a lot of parallels between bullying and other people knowing about what's going on and sexual abuse and molestation claims. And so one of the good points he makes in here is in some ways we're too nice in our culture. We don't want to be nice. We need good people who are courageous, who can confront the potential perpetrators, because there's always a grooming process, it seems, where they go over the line with the texting or social media policies. And when that becomes known, we need to confront. We don't need to move one student from this person's classroom to another classroom and think we dealt with it. We didn't deal with that perpetrator. So anonymous reporting is how we do that. So people tend not to use an 800 number anymore. Stop It is a great technology that actually about 2 years ago I bought 1,200,000 licenses from Stop It, and I offered 25,000 free licenses to every pool that we work with, which is well, every school pool we started with. So that was over 50 programs across the country. The glass half empty or half full here, only 50% of those, approximately 50%, took us up on a free $25,000 offer. Another 50% said, no thank you. What does that say to us? I'm not saying Stop It or anonymous reporting is the panacea for stopping this, but the way it works, it's a key factor in what we want to do is we want as many people, including the students, to be empowered to report this claim. Are there some downsides? Yes, but there's no downside that outweighs eliminating one of these claims. There's not one. So we want to empower the students. These Stop It is also available to teachers and other staff, and we've had amazing success stories across the country with our schools and other, now we're having municipal pools and others use this on a daily basis. I think we have close to 600,000 students who have Stop It available to them through our program. So we're happy about that. One of the features is you get a bunch of data, and Stop It helps you with that. And who wouldn't want to know when reporting is most prevalent and when things are happening? And so this is a slide here that just shows they can do it by days of the week, months of the year. But after Parkland, there was a spike in not only reporting, which, you know, anonymous reporting works for much more than just abuse, molestation, but school violence, bullying, a host of other bad behaviors. But not only did the reporting increase after Parkland, but the number of school districts and others that purchased Stop It and other anonymous reporting tools also spiked. So they had thousands of people doing it. So it's just a key, one of the key elements I think that could be a tool for you and for all of us to help prevent and eliminate some of these claims. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. And data is an important part of your program as well, Deborah. I know you're going to share some of that information with us.
Absolutely. So we used our data, our origami RIMA system, to stratify our SAM claims because we wanted to dig deeper to find out what were those root causes, as we were talking about earlier. And we decided to stratify between elementary, middle or junior high school, and high school. And we came up with some amazing kind of insights that help us fine-tune our risk management approach. So you'll see here our elementary school stratification. And the first thing you should know is that the elementary school claims present far and away the most claims and the highest value of claims. We have the most number of special education students here. 22 students are represented as plaintiffs in this section, and this is predominantly student on student, like 1, 2, 3 staff to student claims in this area. This is student on student claims. So that was interesting for us to understand the impact that special education had on those number of the claims that we were having. Moving to junior high and high school, you think, wow, these are the squirreliest kids, toughest ones to deal with. Really, actually, this is the lowest number of claims and the lowest number of values. But as you're looking at the top line, you can see that here we're starting to have an increase in the staff to student claims. And then moving on to the high school, check that top line out. So a significant increase to staff to student claims, very little student on student, although, you know, you'd expect that that would happen. Kids get frisky or whatever at school. But only 2 special education students represented at the high school as far as claimants. What you also come into is understanding, you know, we're looking also stratifying, as you noticed in these past slides, where those losses occurred. Buses, classrooms, bathrooms, and one of the other things that came out in high school was those field trips, those off-premises kinds of things, those sort of looser things like music and theater that allow more places to hide and have clandestine events and things like that. So this data helped drive our loss control initiatives as we went out and we were talking to some of our districts about their SAM claims. Another thing that we put in place, again, as I told you earlier, was our SAPAC. And SAPAC helped us put together what that care team model would look like. Because on the SAPAC, we have districts, particularly those high-volume claim districts that I told you about a little bit earlier. We have the sex abuse attorneys, and we have our sex abuse investigators that we use. Sitting on that, we have the child psychologist. And staff, and we feel that we have the right people in the room to talk about all of these different things. We have basically identify strategies to disrupt and prevent sex abuse from happening. We interview vendors and products and tools, anonymous reporting tools, as I told you earlier, and we look to create a voice. We look to be able to go to our state legislators with information. We've piloted this tool, we've tried out this thing, this works, here's information that you need to know, legislator, as you're looking at this problem from a completely different standpoint. And Mike, I think you were going to talk a little bit more about some of the advocacy efforts in your state.
Yes, I touch a little bit on the whole role of advocacy and what we think is important from advocacy perspective. We're going to see attacks on governmental immunity. That's a given. There will be an impact on our reserving and our surpluses. We never contemplated these types of claims when we set our prices and underwrote many years ago. I think the collaborative, proactive approach makes sense. Can we educate our policymakers, our legislators? Do they understand this? What I was talking about earlier with the quick rush to alleviate the stress on the victims was politically popular, but was not a long-term approach, and frankly, it wasn't all that collaborative. We need to have that conversation with our policymakers. Insurance isn't a sole solution to this problem. That we talk about things like victims' compensation funds and other ways of dealing with horrendous events like MSU. And I think those conversations really need to take place. And that becomes a key component of advocacy. And advocacy has become much more challenging for our state associations, given the polarization and single issue issues. We see it in our legislature. I know many of you around the country also see it, but it's a much more challenging environment to get people to take a long-term approach on an issue like this, as opposed to just looking at a quick fix. And I think from an advocacy standpoint, that's a challenge. We have lobbyists. Our sister organizations in the state have lobbyists. I think all of you who are involved in that need to have those discussions, create forums to do that, and lastly, identify alternatives. Be creative. I mean, the traditional insurance approach is being stressed by this. What other creative mechanisms can we use long-term to handle issues like this? It's not going away, and I think it's bigger than insurance. It's public policy, and it's related to a trend that we're seeing, Me Too and so forth, that isn't going away either. And I think that this is a bit of the tip of the iceberg and a bellwether, if you will, to an interesting future that we're going to be dealing with. So, Deborah, I think you can talk about how we can move forward in those respects.
Absolutely. I completely agree with everything you said. So collaboration is key. Advocacy is important. Thank you to AGRiP for helping us put this together. This is an organization of sharing, and that's what we're doing up here today. One of the things we're doing in Washington is we're working with WASDA, which is a state organization, on rewriting the sex abuse policies in the state, right? So if you're behind the rewriting of it, you can have a say in how that's going to impact your pool. We're also working with our Office of State Professional Practices. They're the people that get the notification when there's been misconduct by a staff. They do the investigation, they determine whether or not the license is going to stay. They're responsible for keeping our pass the trash laws in place. So we're working with them to sort of understand a little bit more about how that works and how we can help. We're meeting with our competitor in our state. You know, I have half the information, I have half the knowledge, half the ideas. They have the other half. Both of us together ensure every school district in the state and every kid. And so with this idea of two heads are better than one, we're collaborating with each other to talk about how we can, from a statewide standpoint, tackle this issue. And that helps the two pools bring a stronger, more powerful voice to our legislators as we're talking about how we can accomplish having tighter laws, maybe getting some tort limits in place, something. Wild West Washington, that's all I have to say. So finally, the underwriting connection. And you know, when I was listening to Kevin and he was talking about all of these increased limits and deductibles and things, our pool decided to put that last. So we decided, let's give our members the tools, let's give them their loss ratios on their sex abuse, let's allow them 18 months in order to cure this, help them along every every step of the way, give those special districts that are really struggling with sex abuse cases a lot of attention, and with the idea that we can come back to looking at incentives or consequences if they do not make progress on their goals there. We did raise limits from $20 million to $40 million in the state because last year Washington State had its first $40 million verdict. Wasn't in SAM, but just a matter of time. And we wanted to make sure that our limits reflected the potential output that we'd have to pay. We're working on a casualty consortium with our reinsurers. So we're meeting annually, and we're talking via Skype or Zoom quarterly to talk about all of our open cases, to be transparent with where the pool is, in its journey, and they're partners in our journey. I already told you about our 40% increase. We're looking much, much better this year. We've got the hockey stick thing going where the equity is heading back up, and it looks really good. But we're going to be reviewing our pricing going forward. We want to stay ahead of the trend. We want to start watching the media more. Where are these seismic social perception changes that are happening that we can see out there, that wave way out on the horizon that eventually could be the sea change, so we can stay ahead of the curve. And I think, Brett, you'll do a good job in just summing everything up here, because I've basically talked about all of the things
Deborah.
we've done.
So the pressure is on me now to sum this all up. We've had some great information from the panelists, and one of the things that really struck me as a takeaway when I was listening to all of you talk, I had these slides in advance. I had their notes. I knew what they were going to talk about. But hearing them kind of describe the reality of the situation, the significance of the situation was really impactful for me, much more so than just reading it on paper. So, from my perspective, sitting and listening, I hope everyone was able to take that same thing away, so thank you. We think this is such a significant issue that we recorded this morning's session so that we can make it available for future viewing. The panelists as well participated in the most recent intelligence article. I think that was sent out to the membership on September 25th on sexual abuse and molestation claims. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that, it's on the app, so you can download that and read it. It's a great article and one that I think is really useful. So thanks for your contributions to that collectively. We're going to move on now to the group discussion for the segment this morning, and we have about 15 minutes. So we'll maybe take 10 or 12 minutes of group discussion, and then I'll bring us back together to wrap that up. But really to give a little bit of direction to where you're going to go with the 15 minutes that you have together, here are a few questions that we'd like you to just consider. So what are some of the additional data that you need to better understand your SAM risks? What coverage, risk management, other changes would your pool be considering right now? And advocacy, what ideas do you have that would be useful? So really we'd like you to share those together at your tables. Obviously, if there are things, we don't have time to share them this morning, But if you get some great ideas out of that, please share them with the AGRiP staff because we think it would be useful for the membership as a whole. So a few minutes for a group discussion. I hate to interrupt such great conversation at your tables, but it is close to 10 o'clock, so I want to wrap it up. I would like to just to take a minute and thank our presenters again, Martin, Scott, Mike, Craig, Deborah, and Kevin is here somewhere. Kevin, thank you. And a special thanks to Mike Reiner for stepping in last minute. That was well done. I appreciate that. Thank you. This group absolutely deserves that applause. They have been working hard, not just on today's presentation, but to try to find some solutions to sexual abuse and molestation claims. We absolutely appreciate that. Thanks for your time this morning. We are now officially on break until 10:15.